Peanuts, and welcome to anyone who is new to my channel or to this podcast. Now, this podcast covers true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners. There may be graphic or violent content, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. So, hey guys, in today's episodes, we're going to explore how media coverage can shape justice, and we're going to focus a little bit on the Menendez brothers, on OJ Simpson and the Casey Anthony trials. Now, today we have got our Charlie dog featuring with her new pajamas. We also have a Meggie dog just in the background. She's in her pajamas. Yes, they are wearing matching pajamas. It's because, unfortunately, it is very, very cold where we are at the moment, and I take our little Charlie dog for a walk every morning, so she's got a pink puffer vest. So I will have to take a photo and upload that for you guys because I think you'll really find that adorable. You're probably going to see the kitty cats going up and down the stairs, but you can see that Charlie dog is very happily sleeping today. So we're going to start with the Menendez brothers. So the trial of Lyle and Eric Menendez was a real media sensation. So the defense argued that the brothers had suffered years of sexual and emotional abuse at the hands of their parents, which led them to commit the murders out of fear and desperation. So we have covered off a fair amount of this, right, guys? So it's not something I want to rehash, but definitely the prosecution painted a picture a little bit more of like them wanting their fortune. They were really greedy. The media coverage was massive, right? So the news outlets, they were providing live updates. There was media in the actual courtroom. The public's perception of the case was really heavily influenced by the media, with many people viewing them as perhaps cold-blooded and just wanting money. The first trial obviously ended in a mistrial, and the brothers were eventually convicted in the second trial, and they're sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, this was probably in the height of where court TV was just starting. So it's really, really focused heavily on the brothers and how much was available. It was actually quite insane because I think I was in the States at the time, and I remember it vaguely being on in the background of my dad's house. But it was really, really extensive. The amount of media coverage was phenomenal. Now, the next one, obviously, OJ Simpson. We're going to tackle a case that's got it all, right? It's got fame, it's got drama, it's got a high-speed car chase, DNA evidence, and yeah, a trial that practically looked like a Hollywood set. So, yep, you've guessed it, guys. We're going to be talking about the OJ Simpson trial. So buckle up because we are in for one hell of a ride. Now, all right, so I'm going to set the scene for us. It's June 12th, 1994 in Brentwood, Los Angeles. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman are tragically found murdered. Now, the prime suspect, who else? Was OJ Simpson. So he's a football legend at this stage. He's an actor, and he's just an all-around, like everybody knows who OJ is. Now, cue the massive amounts of drama, right? So honestly, it's hard to talk about this without talking about the iconic, white Bronco chase on June 17th. If you're alive back then, I'm positive you're going to remember it. Everyone was glued to their TVs. They're watching it in slow-mo, basically, while this pursuit's going on. And just imagine it though, like imagine it today, a football star in a car chase that's, live to millions. Imagine how much social media would be different if this happened in this time and age. So that moment alone probably catapulted the case into a massive media frenzy. But everyone knows this story already. So they know Nicole, but they really, really get to hear about Ron. So whilst I'm going to do a really brief bio on Nicole, I do want to talk a little bit more about Ron. His life was lost on that day as well, and we hear so little these days about him and who he was. Now, obviously, Nicole Brown Simpson, she's known for her absolutely gorgeous personality and her gorgeous looks and her tumultuous relationship with OJ. She has 2 children with him, and their relationship is marked with allegations of a huge amounts of domestic violence. Everyone has heard the 911 calls. Everyone has heard all of those things that happened to her. However, we've got Ronald Lyle Goldman. He's born on July 2nd in 1968 in Chicago, Illinois, and he grew up in Buffalo Grove. Now, following his parents' divorce in 1974, he initially lived with his mother, but he was actually raised by his dad alongside his little sister, and he was raised in the Jewish faith. He would attend a school in Lincolnshire, Illinois, and he enrolled in Illinois State University for just one semester. He wanted to initially major in psychology, but he would also join one of the fraternities there. His family ended up moving to Southern California when he was 18, so he ended up relocating with them and stopped going to university. But before moving, he was actually a camp counselor, and he volunteered with children who had cerebral palsy. In Los Angeles, he would take classes at the Pierce College. He learned to surf. He enjoyed beach, volleyball, rollerblading, and nightclubbing. Now, literally, he is, an all-American dude. He's really just everybody, by every account in every documentary I've watched, has just said what an amazing human being he was. He would be a headhunter, he was a tennis instructor, and he was a waiter. Occasionally he worked for as a model. He did want to open a bar or a restaurant in the Brentwood area, which he had actually planned to identify with the Egyptian symbol of life, the Ankh, which was tattooed on his shoulder. Now, according to one of his friends, he aimed to learn all aspects of the restaurant and the bar business, and sometimes he worked as a promoter at the Century City dance club called Trips. He attended tended bar at Dragonfly. On Memorial Day, he helped organize a party at Renaissance, a club and a restaurant on the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. He really did. He also had aspirations to wanting to be an actor, and he did appear on an episode of the dating game show called Studs. So he's got a whole entire life ahead of him, and all due to one act of kindness, because Nicole had left her sunglasses behind that night, and he was going to drop them back to her house. It would lead to his death. And all the documentaries, as I said before, they're so heavily focused on what Nicole went through. And do not get me wrong, guys, I think what was done to her was absolutely appalling as well. But it just needs to focus a little bit more on him as well, because it was 2 lives that were lost that night. Now, we're going to flash forward to January 1995, where the criminal trial officially kicks off. And what follows over the next 8 months, it's just fireworks, twists, and obviously a verdict that divided a nation. I might add that at this time, the LA riots had happened. Rodney King had been beaten by the police. The police had gotten off. Those 4 policemen had been acquitted. So LA's already in a pretty tumultuous time itself. So if I can sort of set that scene a little bit more, it's not as black and white as people perhaps think of why he was acquitted. During that time, civil rights, it's up in the air, right? And LA riots have happened. It's not a great time in LA. OJ ended up being acquitted in October of 1993, despite the mountains of evidence, including DNA that was connected to him at the scene. But how did he get there? I think some of it was the media's role, and some of it was where LA was at that time. Now, that's not to say that the DNA that was marked to him wasn't, there's some naughtiness from the LAPD. So lights, camera, action. Okay, folks. So this is where things are going to get a bit fascinating. This wasn't just a trial. It was the reality TV before it was even a thing. So cable news networks like CNN, they basically turned the courtroom into primetime entertainment. They weren't playing what they were normally playing. Every moment, every grasp, every eyebrow that was raised was broadcast live. So it gave the public a real front row seat to the drama. Can you imagine watching a trial like this as a Netflix binge? It's exactly how it sort of all unfolded. So from tabloids to talk shows, everyone wanted a piece of that OJ trial. The tabloids was plastered all over the front pages with the latest twists, while TV networks would have some legal experts which would debate the strategies. It was almost like analysing it like you'd watch a sports play. The trial even made its way sort of like around family dinner tables, and it was water cooler talk. So we've got a lot of it already sort of, as much as you can say to someone and you can say to the jury, hey, don't go out there and watch all this. You think they're not privy to it. Like, there's been 12 months of like all of this before the trial even started. So there's a lot going on. Not 12 months. I think it was like 6 months. But let's be real. The media was all about highlighting all the really juicy bits. So OJ's celebrity status, the racial dynamics, the LAPD's history of missteps. It wasn't just news. It was really entertainment. And if you've ever watched it, like some of the documentaries, one in particular, it's an ESPN one, 30 for 30, and that was really good as well. So what we really can't talk about is also mention what we can't just talk about the trial without mentioning the dream team. So his legendary defense. So these lawyers didn't just like defend. They made it a courtroom. They performed. It was like an act for them. And the glove demonstration, you already know what I'm going to say. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. That line was meme-worthy, and I'm positive there is plenty of them out there. The trial's like a blockbuster movie, and it unfolds in real time, and the public, they really couldn't get enough, because the prosecution's arguing that OJ Simpson was guilty of murders, emphasizing all the physical evidence. This included their DNA findings that linked him to the scene, a bloody footprint that matches to his shoe size, the infamous glove that's discovered at the scene. The prosecution really, they aim to portray him as a domestic violent individual with a history of abuse, suggesting that the motive was rooted in jealousy and anger. Now, despite all of the strength of the evidence, I'm not sure I should use that word strength. I think there was a lot of evidence. The prosecution faced considerable obstacles in this case, as the media coverage often diluted the focus of the facts, and it would sort of just sensationalize aspects of the trial. You know, like Marsha's hairdos, her outfits. It just seemed like they made a bit of a mockery of the prosecution. It just didn't feel right to me. Sorry. Now, the defense, right? So they're called the dream team. It would utilize a strategy that combined legal expertise with public relations. So they argued that the evidence had been mishandled and also been planted, and was found that that was true by the LAPD, pointing out there was racial bias, there was corruption. It was just all of these things at this time. As I said, it's really tumultuous because this Rodney King incident and the LA riots had just happened. So the defense famously used the glove demonstration. That's when Simpson was attempting to wear the gloves. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. This moment was massively amplified in the media. It shifted the public focus away from the evidence to more about the theatrics. So with the extensive media coverage, which was profoundly influenced both on the prosecution and the defense strategies, the prosecution it really, I think it was hindered and faced challenges when maintaining focus on the evidence, as it was just so sensational and there was just so much being covered at the moment at that time. So the media, it was not a great time because they focused so heavily on OJ's celebrity status and also just the racial dynamics. It was really played out. So for the defense, the media was a massive tool for them. So they allowed them to craft narratives that perhaps were not fictionalized, because I don't think they were fictionalized. I think they were just embellished is probably the right word for me. They also knew that at that time that there was a systemic problem with racism, LAPD misconduct, and it was ultimately the media transformed the trial into a cultural phenomenon. It overshadowed a lot of the legal proceedings and it influenced those public perceptions. So both sides had to navigate a unprecedented amount of scrutiny, with the prosecution often struggling to maintain the integrity of their evidence, and the defense would leverage that media to undermine them. Now, it serves as a really stark example of how the media can spin the narrative and shape it in high-profile cases. But you can't say that the public opinion wasn't quite divided, as like a lot of people did believe OJ wasn't guilty. Now, again, I just want to point out, these are not my opinions. This is just what I have investigated and what I've found for myself. So let's talk about the fallout of the trial, though. The media coverage didn't just report about the case. It talked about and it shaped how people felt about it. For the African Americans, its acquittal was seen as a win against that systemic racism in the LAPD. But for others, it sparked outrage over perceived miscarriages of justice. Now, the media's framing amplified these divisions. So making the trial not just a legal battle, but a cultural flashpoint. So, and the focus was so heavily at the time, from what I remember. I mean, I was still quite young, but I was in the States at the time. It focused so heavily on what Nicole's domestic abuse she went through and all that kind of stuff. I felt like Ron's family didn't have a voice in a lot of that trial. At least that is my personal opinion. I felt like there wasn't enough focus on what had happened to him too. But the intense media coverage of the trial, it led to a massive divided public opinion. So again, the media's portrayal was just perhaps not what they needed at that time. Like, it amplified so much. It needed to highlight the systemic amount of racism and all the misconduct that was done in the LAPD. 100%. I'm just not sure this was the trial to do it at. This is something that, and again, where else were they going to do it? Because they'd done it in the Rodney King trial and the cops, against Rodney King. And it didn't seem to show any of those misconducts and those racisms. But the trial showed the media can transform a criminal case. Judges, lawyers, witnesses had cameras watching their every move. It added a whole new layer to the game. Legal experts have actually since called this trial a cautionary tale, reminding us that while transparency is good, sensationalism can definitely muddy those waters. So what do we think I learned from this, or what did we all learn from it? First off, the OJ Simpson trial showed us how media can totally transform a case, right? Knowing the spotlight is on you adds a whole new layer to everything. So I think personally, what we learned from that is you can use the media to your advantage during these types of cases. It's definitely, you look into every type of physical evidence, because obviously prosecution so heavily relied on that physical evidence. And with the misconduct within the LAPD, there's so much afterwards of so many of them going through everything and all the mistakes that they made and all that kind of stuff. And it's not fair to just say it's all those mistakes that the police made and all that kind of stuff, because, there were 12 people on that jury who made that decision to acquit. But it just feels like that there was already such a divide in the nation because of what had happened in LA previously. So for me, I feel like the media massively influenced this. And I just think at the time, and we can look at one today where Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, that's another prime example of having a divided nation, and we're talking about really important things here. We're talking domestic violence. We're talking violence in general against women. And it just feels like it got muddied really quickly. Courts definitely took some notes after this case, though, because restrictions on cameras were timed around trials. There's a lot more focus on balancing transparency with integrity. The OJ trial was a wake-up call about the power of the media and the importance of keeping things fair while the world is watching. So let's wrap it up with the OJ Simpson trial wasn't just a legal case. It was a cultural phenomenon. So it showed us the power of a celebrity, the ripple effects of media coverage, and the deep divisions that can arise from it all, or where you're already standing from. So whether you see the verdict as justice or injustice, one thing's for sure, this trial changed the game, and not just for the legal system, but how we consume and interpret the media. Now, I find it It's very, very concerning to me that we're still talking about it all these years later. But at the same time, it's hit us all so hard. He was a phenomenon. There is a really, really good documentary that dives in, and I'll have to find it and I'll have to link it in here for you guys, where there is a detective that looks at old cold cases, and what he does is he basically investigated the trial again. So what happens is he goes through it, and they suspect that his son did it. It's insane. It was absolutely insane. So we're now going to talk about the Casey Anthony trial. This one's definitely the most infamous trials in American history, I think. The case didn't just play out in the courtroom as well. It unfolded across the public sphere. It's fueled by relentless media coverage again. And it definitely raises some lasting questions about the fairness of justice in this media communication. So in July 2008, 2-year-old Kayleigh Anthony was reported missing by her grandmother, Cindy. Her mother, Casey, was giving conflicting whereabouts about where Kayleigh was. It sparked some suspicions about her involvement. And later that year, Kayleigh's remains were discovered near the family home, which would lead to Casey's arrest and her first-degree murder charges. Now, the trial begins in May 2011, and it's pretty quickly transformed into a national spectacle. News networks provided round-the-clock coverage. They dissected every detail of the case, very similar to what they did with the OJ Simpson trial. Her behavior during the investigation, like her partying, her lack of apparent grief, became a fodder for many media narratives that painted her as, I think she was called America's most hated mum. Now, major outlets like CNN and Fox News devoted an extensive amount of time to the trial. Headlines were sensational, and every twist in the story was magnified. So social media brought a whole new level to this. Now, platforms like Twitter and Facebook were buzzing with hashtags, memes, and heated debates about her guilt. Now, Casey herself is not, in my opinion, she is not a likable person. She actually, if I'm going to be honest, I can see why people really didn't like her. She didn't certainly act like a grieving mum, which I think is possibly why she was so hated. The media's portrayal of her influenced public opinion massively. Polls during the trial, they showed that most people believed she was actually guilty. That's even before a verdict is even thought about. So how much do we think was shaped by solid evidence, and how much was it done by the media? That's the question I'm sort of going to talk about today. Now, the trial itself, cameras captured every moment, turning the courtroom into a stage again. Millions watched the proceedings as though it was like a new episode of Law and Order. Lawyers and witnesses became unintended celebrities. They're scrutinized as much as the evidence itself. Social media expanded the spectacle, created a parallel courtroom where everyone had an opinion. So the prosecution's arguments was that she was a habitual liar. She killed her daughter Kayleigh, and then covered up her murder because she wanted to get away with it, basically. They presented evidence showing that Casey had lied about nearly everything relating to the case. It was including her whereabouts, her actions during the time that she's missing, that Kayleigh is missing. The prosecutor, Jeff Ashton, appealed to the jurors' emotions, stating that Kayleigh died because she had 3 pieces of duct tape over her nose and mouth, and that Casey decided that the life she wanted was more important than her own daughter's. The prosecution's case was built on the theory that Casey had given Kayleigh chloroform and then suffocated her with duct tape. And the defense had a flip side of that, right, though. They said that Kayleigh had accidentally drowned in the family swimming pool, and that Casey's behavior was a result of her compulsive lying. So they claimed that Casey's father, George, had helped cover up the accident itself, and they focused on creating reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds, pointing out that so they called the prosecution's case a fantasy, and it's saying that they had a lack of evidence. They emphasized that no witnesses testified that Kayleigh had been anything other than a loving mother. The defense also highlighted the inconsistencies in the prosecution's evidence and argued that the circumstances around Kayleigh's death were not proven. Now, here's a problem, because when a trial becomes entertainment, does justice become the back seat? Kayleigh's right to the presumption of innocence was undermined by an overwhelming amount of media attention. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this media circus that posed judicial fairness. Jurors were instructed to avoid media coverage, but honestly, how do you do that when all of the coverage before the trial? It's putting an immense amount of pressure on attorneys and witnesses just because of all this media coverage. Defense attorney Jose Diaz, he was heavily criticized, and prosecutors definitely felt the weight that the public demanded for the, conviction of the murder of a child, whether it be a murder or an accident. Jurors were definitely instructed to stay away, but it's really unrealistic for them to remain completely impartial. I think the persuasive media presence made it difficult for them to stay impartial. At least that is my interpretation, okay? So my interpretation is that it would have been really hard to avoid all of this. So both the defense and prosecution, they faced immense pressure. It was the shift in focus, really, the intense media scrutiny shifted the focus from evidence really about personalities. It's a dangerous time, though, when we're meant to live in a system that's meant to uphold fairness and impartiality. And how do you do that when the media is being quite relentless on how awful a human being you are? So when Kayleigh Anthony was acquitted for murder charges, the public, massive outrage, huge amounts of outrage. Many felt that the justice system had failed. Protests would soon erupt, coverage continued, and it just dissected every implication of the verdict. But one lesson that's been learned from this case is the need for ethical media practices. Sensationalism may drive ratings, but it definitely distorts the judicial process. Balanced reporting must take precedence, especially in high-profile cases. Now, when Kayleigh Anthony was acquitted of her murder charges, there's a significant amount of people that are talking about it on social media. They're attacking her. They're doing everything they can. So it's just, for me, whilst I understand the need to have a opinion and make sure that, what you've read is realistic, but how much of it, though, is what we read and what we see actually what happened? And I just think that perhaps it's really dangerous to know too much information before we know where everything sort of is at. So where do I think that sort of leaves us? I think it serves as a cautionary tale about what the media can influence on our justice system. While they definitely play a huge and crucial role in the public, keeping them informed, it's got to sort of exercise a little bit of restraint and a little bit of responsibility to make sure that the narratives aren't undermined by the judicial process and legal proceedings. It really doesn't end here, though. So we're going to start with Kayleigh's Law. That's an initiative that's been born in the aftermath of Kayleigh's heartbreaking story. It's a movement that's aimed at imposing stricter legal requirements on parents to report disappearance or the death of their child. Now, this call for the law gained massive traction. So one petition on change.org garnered 1.3 million signatures. Lawmakers in states like Florida, Oklahoma, New York, and West Virginia began drafting versions of Kayleigh's Law as early as 2011. For example, the Oklahoma law will require parents to notify law enforcement within 24 hours if a child goes missing, and it specifies time frames for cases involving children underneath the age of 12. Florida's version takes it one step further, making it a felony if a parent or guardian fails to report a missing child in a timely manner, especially if they could have known that the child was in danger. Mandatory reporting laws have faced some criticisms, or some massive, I would say are huge. Some suggest that the laws may lead to over-compliance, with parents potentially filing false reports due to fear of suspicion. This could result in wasted police resources and delays in responding to actual abductions during crucial early hours. Additionally, there is a possibility that innocent individuals may encounter legal complications for searching for a child themselves instead of immediately contacting law enforcement. Now, Kayleigh's grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony, they had a heartfelt memorial service for her in 2009, an event that Casey herself would end up revisiting later for a documentary in 2022. It was quite emotional to hear some of the things that George shared during his reflections, lamenting that strangers will never feel Kayleigh's presence or her energy, and calling her hugs a source of unimaginable strength. Their story continues on in 2012 when new evidence emerged. A WKMG TV in Orlando found overlooked browser history on Casey's computer. Investigators missed searches on Firefox because they focused so heavily on Internet Explorer. One notable search on a password-protected account was foolproof suffocation, and that's followed by clicks on articles about pro-suicide websites at 2:51 p.m. on the day that Kayleigh died. What's even more intriguing is that Jose, her defense attorney, speculated that the state didn't introduce the evidence in the trial because it contradicts the timeline provided by Casey's father, George. Analysis shows activity on her computer at 1:39 p.m., including interactions on sites like MySpace, AIM, Facebook, sites that George didn't use. So in late 2022, Peacock would release a docuseries titled Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. Now, this explores her psychological state, the impact of her alleged sexual abuse. It suggests that Casey her lying was a defense mechanism due to the trauma, and it questions why George was never suspected in Kayleigh's disappearance in the first place. Now in 2025, Casey has emerged as a legal advocate. She announced a new career on her TikTok, promotes her email newsletter and her plans to Substack as a platform for this advocacy. Now, she aims to support women, the LGBT community, and honour Kayleigh's memory. She also opened up about her own past, claiming her pregnancy was a result of her being drugged and raped at a house party when she was only 18 years old. It's definitely a story that continues to evolve. It sparks a lot of debates, inspiring memorials, and it leaves a really complex legacy. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode as I sort of engaged in a little bit more direction of media influence and how it impacts the judicial system. It's definitely been a really good one. To wrap up, though, I've explored how media coverage shapes justice through the stories of the Menendez brothers, OJ Simpson, and the Casey Anthony trials. They definitely revealed the significant impact of the media narratives on public sentiment and courtroom decisions. It's definitely, for me, the Menendez brothers, like you look at Ryan Murphy, he did, this TV show and everyone is still talking about the Menendez brothers. OJ Simpson, there is one that is on Netflix. We're still talking about it. We're still talking about Casey Anthony. So it doesn't matter if you don't know who they are or anything like that. All you have to do is turn on something and I can guarantee you'll know exactly who they are. But thank you for joining this episode from Crimes from the Peanut Peanut Gallery. If you found this story as chilling as I did, please subscribe, hit that like button, leave a comment, do whatever you want to do. There is a bunch of episodes for you to go and look at on serial killers as well. Stay tuned for my next episode where I dive into another delve, where I dive into another dark and twisted episode. Until then, stay safe, stay vigilant, and have a fabulous weekend, my fellow peanuts. Bye, guys.